Before we move on to questions, let me just get started with asking Dana and Chris to tell us a little bit about their companies and what you do.
Dana, go first.
All right, well, can you hear me? Because it doesn't stretch anymore. Okay. Well, what Cloud Park does is machine learning with computer vision, and it uses smart cameras that are sky view, 20 to 35 feet high, and LPRs, which are 10 feet high, and they hand off data. It's backed by 23 patents, and so it captures data in real time, digests it, distributes it, and even acts on it. So it fully automates the parking life cycle. So what that means is it helps the driver through a consumer app find the next available parking spot. And once they park, there's nothing for them to do. There's no meter. There's no meter reader. The cameras pick up the license plate, put an automatic timer on it, so every vehicle has its own personal timer. And there's nothing for the driver to do. The municipality, there's nothing for the municipality to do. It's all automated. But then it goes further. Because it has the real-time data, it can do dynamic and variable pricing, and that would include anything. So, you have a world now, you have stakeholder pricing, pricing to drive behavior, influence behavior. So you've got, you can do senior citizen pricing. You can do, instead of having metered pricing tickets and violations, you can actually just do progressive pricing, that after the 2-hour mark, for example, it'll be another, every 15 minutes will be even more and more expensive. And so, and I know from some municipalities that that's a different kind of collection thing as well. It's a different kind of procedure, because some municipalities have the cities get the metering monies, and some and the county gets the violation monies. So it gets very complicated. So that would change the face of that. But also you can do the reverse can be true. So if they move quicker, you can bonus them by discounted pricing. So this can be all automatic in real time. And then it goes even further, where you can do automatic capture and enforcement of violations. And not just metered violations, but all kinds of violations, double parking, parking in a handicap zone, et cetera. And so what makes this technology so unique is it can be used for multiple purposes and multiple users all at the same time. And back to Jim's point about sustainability, once you have those cameras up there and you have this this amazing AI machine learning, and as you know, it gets smarter the longer it's in play. And it's already outfitted for autonomous vehicles. So it's got DSRC, and there's drone technology affiliated with Cloud Park. But when David has his own vehicles come out, you've now got extra set of eyes. And so Cloud Park looks at itself as the perfect pivotal point for the infrastructure, parking, and transportation. So while it's picking up all this data on the street, it can be also directing autonomous vehicles, and it could also be used for security, any kind of data anybody wants to capture. But the other thing that people should keep in mind is that when you're talking about machine learning and computer vision, that it's very specific. So it doesn't pick up everything. It picks up what it's trained to pick up. So if I were to say, and they're like little robots on the street. So if I were to say, I'm teaching you to clean, and I put you in apartment A and apartment B, it still cleans and only cleans, but it will clean each one differently. So now you open up a whole nother level of what is really smart city. It's now you've got systems in play that actually become one with the infrastructure. And that's a whole new breed of IoT and smart city that hasn't been done before. And now all of a sudden, what wasn't possible is now possible, and it just can get very crazy from there.
Wow, thanks, Dana. Chris,
Dana, I don't know what to say. I mean, come on.
I think she showed you up.
We've known each other for quite a while, so anyway. First of all, Jim and ARC, thank you for inviting us. SimCom is a company that enables smart city outcomes. And that's based upon a foundation of smart and connected lighting infrastructure. And at the end of the day, we're really all about an internet of outdoor things, or as I prefer to call it, an internet of municipal things. And it's all about data, instrumenting the physical world and getting that data back to cloud-based applications to enable outcomes. And so I won't go into all the use cases here, but there are many of them. And we've built a very flexible, I call it like an operating system for outdoors. You know, we build a digital canopy over a city with partners to enable possibilities that the cities didn't know they could realize. And there's some very interesting use cases that sort of come out of this work that we've done with partners and cities.
Great, thanks, Chris. Before we start asking questions, how many of you have the ARC application, mobile phone application? Okay.
All right.
There's a polling function in there where you can rate this session, so I'd ask you to take a look at that. And of course, we'd appreciate if you could tweet or retweet about this session and the larger ARC forum as a whole using the hashtag #ARCforum. So with that, we'll move on to questions. And I'll start from the very broad and general down to more focused. For each one of you, what really is a smart city? I mean, what applications? And what's a smart city platform?
You want me to start?
Go ahead, Chris.
Okay. So I think you have to realize that every city is unique, and what means smart to one may not mean smart for another. So again, it goes back to outcomes. What does the city want to achieve? How does it want to get better? But if you generally look at it, it revolves around a number of areas. The first is energy and sustainability. The other is performance of the assets. Third could be public safety. Quality of life is another broad category. Are we able to attract tourists? Are we able to attract new citizens? Do businesses want to relocate? For example, if you look at Indianapolis and Charlotte, they're about the same size. You may say they're in different states. They don't compete against each other. Wrong, they do. There's also the whole issue of development and commerce. So, how many of us have an ugly commute where you're looking at a sea of red taillights going to work or coming home, right? That just impedes economic movement of goods and services throughout the city, along with parking. So it really depends on what the individual city is. So you have to ask the question, what's important, and how do you put those priorities in place?
Great, Chris. A number of us have mentioned sustainability. And classically speaking, there is a definition for sustainability, and includes 3 pillars. One is to preserve and enhance the natural environment. The second is to preserve and enhance societal benefits, a human quality of life. But the third, and it's one that's most often forgotten, is to do so in an economically reasonable manner. So with that in mind, let me ask all the panelists, what are the lowest hanging fruit applications here that can drive a better physical natural environment, better human quality of life, but can be paid for in a reasonable amount of time? Where do you go first?
You want you to know.
So one of the things we talk about in my group back and forth often is we do IoT, but we do IoT where it makes business value. And so one of the things that we've looked at is just energy management alone. We've done some experiments and found that we could get 20% savings in energy management just by having visibility to data that we didn't have previously before it was different devices were censored with IoT. So energy is one place in particular where you could start seeding the funding of your smart infrastructure, if you will.
Yeah, I think if you look at lighting, and we have some lighting colleagues here, so they're probably familiar with this data, but as Jim mentioned, if you convert your lighting infrastructure to LEDs, the Energy Information Agency reports that you can save about 50% on energy. And then if you use controls where you have more effective dimming and brightening is also an element of that, so that the level of light suits the time of day and the use case, you can save another 10, 20, or 30%. Being an old factory floor guy like I am, I think the bigger play is on the management of the assets. And so the data suggests that if you don't have controls on your outdoor lighting infrastructure, and there's a problem, it takes about 2.6 rolls of a truck to fix it. One, either discovery and or validation of a citizen's complaint. The second is to go out and roll the truck and, oh, I don't have the right part, so I've got to go back a third time. You're nodding your head, so you know what I'm talking about. And if you live in a state like I do, Massachusetts, I'm from Florida, but I live in Massachusetts, you've got to have a cop there. So think of the cost involved. So if you put in controls on your lighting infrastructure, you can get that down to one truck roll. And then if you have visibility, situational awareness into all the fixtures or street lights that need to be repaired, you can plan the most effective route to drive the truck so that you minimize the driving distance. And how many of you know that UPS, they like to make right-hand turns? They realized when they started doing that policy that if I can do mostly right-hand turns, I save 8% on fuel and another 10 or 12% on productivity. So, these are the things that you have to look at. We find in our space that a lot of cities and utilities will realize a return on investment in as little as 2 years. Often it's more like 4, 5, 6. And then you've got a foundation in place, the smart and connected lighting infrastructure to deploy other applications that are the payback ones that citizens really want to know about and they want to see undertaken.
Thanks, Chris. We know that public agencies don't have unlimited budgets. So in the last few years, there's been quite an increase in the role of public-private partnerships and special purpose vehicles for financing. For all three of you, for projects like this, do these tend to be standalone where the city builds it all on their own? Does the vendor come in and do all of it? Or is there a much more of a creative relationship between the vendor or multiple vendors and the public agency? Dana.
And this piggybacks on Chris's comments and the previous question. I think if you do it right, you can knock a couple birds out with one stone. With the infrastructure coming in play, with things that actually generate revenue, and things that are actually now we can do things that weren't possible before, where we can actually customize the business model. So in the example of parking and Cloud Park, I can give you, as of today, let's say 2016, New York City wrote up $1 billion in parking tickets. And that's just the tickets alone, not the metering side, just the tickets. And that represented about 5 to 10% of the potential revenue. And out of that $1 billion, 40% was dismissed for whatever reason. Dismissals happen. And then out of the remaining 60%, 2/3 went to administrative costs. So now you're looking at $1 billion that goes down to conceivably $330 million. However, you forget about the collection model of those tickets. So collections on a good day is about 50%. So that's utterly ridiculous. And now if you put in infrastructure with a money-making vehicle that actually has a business model not only for the vendor and the municipality, which could be done either a public-private partnership can be sliced, that pie can be sliced in any which way you want, and brings in the community. So maybe per transaction, then you've got, Cloud Park could give the system away for free and share on the gains, not just on the back-end revenues, but on the gains. It can also do fee for service. or hybrid. So these new technologies allow business models that will actually be a win-win-win-win-win, and coming down to the citizen and bringing that citizen in to the picture that brings now a public-private partnership that never was before.
Great. Thanks, Dana. We do have a session later in the week on smart city best planning practices. But let me ask the three of you that, if I'm a public agency, a city manager, and I want to embark on a street lighting system or a parking system or mobility as a service effort, where do I start on day one? How do I plan for this? Do I only appeal to the elected officials, or how broad do I cast the net over the stakeholder communities?
From experience, it's kind of like, when you go to a big family meeting, like the holidays, got all these dynamics. So it's really important that if there's any major initiative in a city, that you have the city leadership, the mayor, the city manager, the councilman, the selectmen, all behind it. And there really needs to be a good plan. And you need to really reach out broadly to all the potential stakeholders. It's a political thing. It's not in my backyard. Why would we want to change and do that? I'm sure my lighting colleagues like Acuity and Signify will appreciate this. I live in the North Shore of Massachusetts, and everybody's heard of Gloucester, the fishing town, and they put out a bid a few years ago for 3,000 or 4,000 streetlights, and they had a big war on what was the color intensity and what was the style of the light. And so it took them like 6 months to decide, because it became very emotional. It was even reported in the Boston Globe. Okay, so it's all about the plan and getting buy-in, and then also trying to figure out the economics. And what a lot of cities don't do, and where they fail, is they don't think about what is the talent that's needed to deploy these systems. Because when you look at smart cities, sure, it's lighting, but it's really an OT and IT play. And it's all about networks and data, and so they often discount that. So you mentioned earlier the definition of smart city that you borrowed from the
Right.
Smart City Council. They and others have really good resources. Go to Smart Cities Council, I think it's .org. Click on resources. They've got, okay, here's how you get started. Here are the economics of lighting. There's another group called the TM Forum. Cisco's got a bunch of good stuff. So there's a lot of good material out there that can, be a cookbook and provide some guidance. But at the end of the day, you got to have committed citizen or city leadership to get it done.
And I agree with Chris, and I would like to add that I think all too often the community is not engaged and probably should be engaged, because it offers another point of view that is very vital to the rollout of new technologies. In fact, some new technologies, no matter how good they are, have failed completely because the community didn't have any feedback. So I would bring them in earlier, and because the whole point of Smart City is to have a healthy well-being for the community at large. And if you leave them out of the conversation, then what's really the point? And so I think it's a three-pronged approach between the municipality, the private sector, and the community. In fact, the community actually kind of creates the data that Smart City is built on, and then they're the recipient of the manipulation of that data that influences their behavior. So if you don't have them in at the beginning, you leave yourself open to a lot of risk.
If I could just add to Dana's point, I spoke at a conference back in December, and I was talking to the Chief Innovation Officer and the Chief Information Officer of Sacramento, California, and they've embarked on a big smart city project with Verizon, providing infrastructure. So they're doing a lot of trenching and construction. And the two key points that they brought up, which I think we as practitioners and technologists and technology companies forget, is all about inclusion, to your point, and it's all about accessibility. And when I mean accessibility, I mean in the broadest sense. So if you're looking at intelligent transportation mobility systems, it's that last mile. I can get the bus, I can get on a train, but how do I get home or get to that bus station? So we're talking about, what I call micro mobility, bicycles, electric scooters, things like that. And then this idea of being connected to what's going on in the community. So mobile apps, digital signage, things like that. And that's the one thing that we often forget about it, but that's changing.
And just to piggyback off of Dana's comment on community, if you think about it, it's not smart if it doesn't solve a person's problem.
Right.
We can apply technology all day long, and if it's just about citations and city management, then it becomes Big Brother, and people don't adopt it and don't embrace it. So it's important to understand what the community needs are, and not just what the community needs are today, but what they're going to be 10, 15, 20 years from now, because they're making large investments. This is coming off of taxpayer money. It's not easy to get the money. So they have to make the right investments. And one of the big complaints that I've heard in working with the cities is that they went with some company and they tied them into an ecosystem that they can't do what they really wanted to do with this solution right up front. So if you're driving a car and the faster you're moving, the further you got to look down the road. So again, when you're planning the cities, you got to look further down the road and really understand where your community's heading.
Thanks, David. I'll put in the final comment on this, that I really like the U.S. Department of Transportation's approach to planning. They start with defining your stakeholder communities over the entire project life cycle, from conception to retirement. That's down to the waste management people that need to dispose of whatever it is. But they have 3 steps. Some of you computer science people will recognize it as the old V waterfall model. So in step 1, it's define your stakeholder communities and exhaustively query them. Well, first, define a huge range of stakeholder communities. So in a mobility project, it's all the community activist groups, the business association, the elected officials, the maintenance staff that are on with the city, the contractors that work for the city, the bicycle group in town, the private bus lines that run through town, maybe the private bus contractor, all of those people. You might have 30, 40 stakeholder communities. Then it's time to ask them open-ended questions where they provide you a long narrative. And once you do all of that, you can look through those and begin to collate to find the deliverable in that first phase, which is consensus-based user needs. So from that you have, I need a bike lane on my bridge, or I need to backhaul water meter data or sewage lift station data. But that's only a narrative. In step 2, you refine that into a measurable requirement. So that requirement can become a formal specification that goes out in a bid document, and it could be something that could even be shared a little earlier with some potential vendors. The third piece of it is test plans, so that as you move through this process from conception to design, to implementation, to operations, to final retirement, well, you can test along the way. So when that pump controller shows up, or even before it shows up on site at the lift station, well, it can be tested at the factory to make sure it did in fact satisfy those consensus-based user needs. So that does seem like a lot of overhead to do up front, but trust me, problems identified early, before things are even on paper, are much cheaper to solve when you've built the bridge and it's missing the bike lane. So that stakeholder outreach, user need solicitation, and turning that to requirements is really what you need to do. And your applications are very different. You might lead with parking or street lighting or mobility. You don't know. So and none of us come from a perspective where we know it all either. So you're doing yourself, a great injustice if you cast that net small, either around the elected officials or some public works workers. It's got to be very broad so you don't leave anything out. So with that, everything here is a network that I'm hearing about, and I hear a lot about cybersecurity threats. What do you do about cybersecurity? Can anybody hack in and steal a parking space or a streetlight?
Well, not that I know of. But, I think that's going to be an ongoing threat I think the same problems that exist in other industries probably exists here, but let's talk about that for a second, because where is the data? Where does the data go? Where does it get stored? Where does it, because with the machine learning, it picks up very specific data, and it doesn't, and only stores as per the statutes in that area. And but if the city intends to gather a whole bunch of data and then own it, then it's on them, and this becomes a huge nightmare I see coming down the road. I think data ownership and storage is a huge conversation that has to take place between the private sector and the public sector, and I do not agree that the city should own everything and store everything and take the risk and the liability and pay for it on top of it. So I think those are conversations that need to be had, especially in light of cybersecurity.
Well, I think there's also the cybersecurity arguments tend to fall into two camps, because for some mature applications like electric grade meter reading, there are cybersecurity standards in place, and there are some vendors that do streetlight metering that generate a bill from each individual streetlight. And that data is protected to the standards that are in place by NIST and a whole lot of others. But in some developing applications, it's not so much. Autonomous shuttles, we're not exactly there yet. Chris?
Yeah, this is, I think, an area that requires further development, and let me see if I can break it down into the pieces. So, we talk about using sensors and controls to instrument the physical world to gather data to, first of all, have situational awareness and manage better. And so if you take these things and you put all these devices out there in the physical world, it's really hard to physically secure them. You can't lock them away. So I think that's probably the area of greatest vulnerability. And then if you sort of move up the stack, you have streetlight controllers and you have other edge computing devices. Those are fairly secure. I'm sure they can be hacked, but they're pretty solid. I think there's more work that needs to be done. Our streetlight controllers and other technologies speak over IT networks or a lot of the smart grid networks. So like Cisco, Itron, Silver Spring, those are quite secure and robust and resilient. So they're pretty good there. I think, once you get in the cloud, there are a lot of tools in place. But I think the big gap is, so as an example, we're talking to a few companies that have radar. And these are kind of OEM products, and they're often, how many of you are driving down the road and you see a sign that says you're going too fast, it's 35 and you're doing 50? That type of radar, but they go into another person's product. They're not thinking about cybersecurity for that issue. So if we were to take that and deploy it on a streetlight pole to do traffic counting or people counting, we got to make sure that it's, not going to be hacked. So I think that's where the really big gap is. And it's almost like, last mile endpoint, like you're finding in, industrial automation, process control, and high performance building systems.
How many of you heard this week, if you see something, say something? It's really turned into a situation of risk management with the Internet of Things. Everything's connected. And so when these devices that are connected, that has intelligence and they can learn from each other at the speed of light, it becomes a real challenge, especially if that learning is not the type of learning that you would want it to have. So it's not just humans anymore that are attacking our systems, but it could be machines. So it becomes a matter of how do we manage that risk when it does happen and stop it and shut it off and mitigate it as quickly as possible.
Okay, how about the issues of interoperability versus proprietary networks and the impact of standards in that domain? Why would I pick an interoperable device versus proprietary device? What are the benefits and pitfalls of each?
Then I can go to you.
Sure.
Then I'll.
Yeah, so, and I'll talk a little bit more about this on Wednesday, but that's one of the challenges we have in a large company like Ford. We've got a lot of different vendors coming in, wanting to sell us their ecosystem. Often they want to also own the data, and then we have to buy back our own data that we're giving them. So it's a very huge challenge and very expensive when we're looking at lighting systems that can provide us with all kinds of additional information, such as humidity, proximity, a lot of different sensors out there. We're looking at different companies. Some of you are in this room. And we're also looking at different furniture companies that are producing the same types of systems and solutions. Pretty soon, we'll have like 5 networks that do the same thing. If we were to go with a system that locks us into their standards and ecosystem, we can't afford that as a business. So we have to look at things that are a little more open in terms of standards and interoperability. We have the same thing that happens in our homes in the commercial retail space. I'm sure many of you are frustrated. You've either bought into one of the ecosystems, Google, Amazon, or Apple, and it does everything you want except for that one thing, and they won't talk to each other. I recently got a Fitbit and found out I can't send my data to my Apple Health app. So it's very frustrating, even as a consumer, and can get very expensive. So we really need to get to that point. Somebody's going to break that cycle, and whoever's first to market with that is really going to have a field day.
There's you have to look at what's the network, right? And there are multiple types. You sort of start with the low-powered wide area networks, LoRaWAN, Sigfox, RPMA from Ingenu's, another one. Those are proprietary. They all kind of work about the same. Then if you go up the stack in smart cities, you're looking at mesh networks, and Zigbee is one, but there's a fairly decent amount of convergence around something called WISUN, so WISUN. So that's a smart grid network, and so Itron and Cisco and Silver Spring and Landis and Gear and there was one other. They're converging around that standard. And the whole idea is that, if I'm a utility or a city, why do I have to put a separate network in for each application? And so you get the advantage of Metcalfe's law, the power of a network is equal to the square of the number of users if you can run multiple applications on that. And so most of these utility, smart grid, AMI networks are in the 900 megahertz range. So you'll see a standard evolve over the next couple of years, and all of those companies are committed to that. So for an example, we work with Cisco. They deploy meters on that. Our streetlight controllers go on that, and we're also using that same network to push little bits of data that are gathered from a smart node that we have that connects to other sensors to go over that same network. So if you look at cities, it's neat to talk about the applications, but many of them are focused on lifetime total cost of ownership. And so you can minimize your cost if you can deploy those networks more effectively and have applications coalesce around a common one.
Mm-hmm. And I think designing the technologies to have some more seamless integration and work with the open APIs is huge, and cities are asking for that.
The last definition for today, for this session, will be interoperability. Interoperability, the ISO has defined a 7-layer OSI model for interoperability. So I won't bore you with all 7 layers, but the bottom layer is the physical layer so that your connectors must match its socket. And on the highest level, it's the application layer. So your application is your web pages must be in HTML. That's great. That makes things, if you adhere to all 7 layers, and not all technologies adhere to all 7 layers, so they might be interoperable at some layers, but it won't be plug and play like when you buy a USB mouse or a traffic signal today. Not interoperable. So interoperability is nice. It brings more products to market, and it drives down the cost, and it drives refinements and competition. On the other hand, you have a lot of different manufacturers, and someone needs to take responsibility for when something doesn't work correctly. So there is an advantage for the proprietary world where you have one vendor that you pay to run it, perhaps as a service, and you don't have to worry about interoperability. But you might give up something in terms of future features. So with that, I'll open it up to, do we have any questions from the audience? Go ahead, James.
At SAS, we have a number of smart cities projects in Asia, in India, in North America. And the most interesting contrast between those when I speak with customers is their approach to privacy and data protection. So if you could take a minute or two from each of you and talk about a project you've worked on and approaches to privacy that you've noticed with your customers.
I got plenty of go first.
Sure. So privacy is a huge issue at Ford, and we take it very seriously. One of the projects that I had a summer intern working on this past summer was listening to conversations in a room to get sentiment. And right away, he wanted to shut down the project because, you know, the concept of listening to someone. And I said to him, somebody's going to do this. It can either be us or it could be one of the other companies out there. Our goal is to do it in a way that we can show it's possible to get what we're trying to achieve from this without compromising privacy. And so what we did is we scrambled the audio so that with machine learning we could still understand the different tonation changes and come up with an algorithm to determine sentiment. And we did this all at the edge, so all the data was discarded immediately. So there's ways of balancing the technology with the application of using people's data and privacy. And that's one of the things that we're doing at Ford.
CloudPark's a new technology, so it's in the commercial stages, but to protect privacy, there's, even when they pick up license plates, it comes in hashed. And so, and that's the only data, everything else, it's anonymous data. So, so that's pretty much, you know, it. So.
Most of the data that we enable the collection of is, call it, you know, machine or you know, thing data. So it usually does not involve people. But often we do a lot of processing on the edge, and you only send back kind of the results. You don't send back the discrete data. So it's, you know, it's tossed away, so to speak. So we haven't had an issue. I will mention that one of the other companies that's in the smart parking space, they deploy cameras, and they call them optical sensors to get away from this, you know, collecting data and, you know, look at people and, you know, recognize your face, right? So, so there are ways to skin the cat to lessen the emotion behind it.
Other questions out there? Suzanne?
Thanks all. This has been interesting, and it's fascinating to listen to all the different perspectives. I'm really interested in the business models you all are imagining from your different perspectives, both as a partner in a public-private partnership, as a company, you know, thinking about it both, you know, from your internal ROI, I guess, that you're investing in all of these efforts, but also how it fits into your future product roadmap, and kind of as an ecosystem player, sort of where do you see the most interesting business models emerging, and what ideas do you have for the community here to kind of be more disruptive on that front?
Okay.
It's customized business modeling, and I think that again we never had that chance to do that in the past with municipalities. So CloudPark, everything is customized, and it can be done to the exact use case, and also if. You know, municipalities are at their evolutionary stage. So one of the things that the technology prides itself on is the fact that it can integrate what's there and make it smarter. So if there's a pay station that has a contract in place, that's fine. So now that portion is already taken care of, and so CloudPark can actually collect the data, shoot it into the pay station, make that smarter, and then capture and enforce the violations which the existing contract does not do. And so so the business model would then be based on the violations and, you know, transferring data to a pay station. So in that scenario, it would probably be fee for service plus some gain share on the back end. So what's out there, what I've seen is actually sharing of the revenues, and, transaction fees to the consumer, transaction fees to the municipality. And we've got to talk about also the combination of hardware and software, because Cloud Park is a software technology at heart, but it does go hand in hand with hardware, and it can sell it all as a package deal, or the municipality, if they already have hardware or hardware vendor, that can go separately, and it becomes sort of another interesting marriage. But then you open up a whole other conversation of making sure that the upgrades also go hand in hand. And so, there's a price for maintenance and support. There's a price for usage, and then you have the consumer app that can be also that can be charged to the consumer. And then, so you've got layers, but it's a very good question, because a lot of municipalities don't understand all the fees and what they're attributed to, and that has to be spelled out.
I think one way to look at this is that cities and utilities have traditionally been involved in what I'll call a CapEx model, right? So they want to go out and they want to buy the asset, and they want to own it, and they have to figure out, okay, which budget year does it fit in, and how do I, find the capital to do that? Do I do it from savings? Do I do a bond issue or whatever? And so what you're actually starting to see, and this is where we in the industry, I think, can provide more education for the cities. If you look at the life cycle cost of a project, so let's say outdoor smart and connected lighting, let's say 20 years, right? High performance buildings, 20, 30, 40, you're talking 60. So if you look at sort of the life cycle cost for that asset, only about 15 to 20% of that comes from the CapEx side, so the design and build, the engineering, and the financing. The other 80% is going to come from the energy and the maintenance, repair, and operational, and then other costs that might accrue to that. So we in the industry have to get the cities to think about the whole cost, not just the acquisition cost. And so that's lending itself to some very interesting business models where companies are teaming up to provide, for example, lighting as a service. So let's say Eaton or Acuity or Philips and we work together, and they provide the lighting, we provide the controls. We find a third-party company to finance it. They own the assets. And the payment for the assets at a service level agreement of 99.5% is less than the energy saving. So it takes it off the balance sheet. It makes it cash flow positive. So every project's different, every city's different. You just need to really try to figure out, you've got an onion there. You start peeling the layers of the onion back and say, okay, how can we make this work to satisfy the city objectives and pay for it? So there's some really cool stuff going on. And you're starting to see the strategics of big companies like you guys, smaller companies like us, working with third-party strategic funders. Say, okay, how can we make this work? There was a nice case, North Las Vegas. I can't remember the number of lights, 27,000, something like that. They wanted to put that in, and then the lighting would pay for it, and they were going to layer other smart city services on top of it. And it was going to be funded by somebody else that owned the assets, and at the end of 10 or 20 years said, here it is for $1. So my 2 cents worth on that.
And I know you have a comment, but I just wanted to interject. You can also have financing, and it's not unusual for a big company actually to take on the financing of the project for municipality.
Performance contracts is another way
Yeah.
for the ESCOs, for example.
Yeah.
So if we think about why we live in a city or where we live, it's all about the experience. And that experience can come in from a lot of different reasons. You want to be close to where you work, you like the schools, whatever that reason might be, it's about the experience. The automotive industry is not much different. If you think about how much you've spent on your vehicles for something that sits idle 93 or more % of the time, that's a lot of money for something that's non-performing. That model is shifting. So today in the auto industry, the profits that really come from the industry, it's through service, it's through spare parts sales, it's through financing of the vehicles, not actually the vehicles themselves. What happens when that model changes and now we have shared vehicle ownership or we have autonomous vehicles and people aren't owning vehicles as much as they used to be? Those vehicles being taken out of service now is going to hurt our bottom line because what we're doing is selling experiences as well. So the whole model shifts, and we have to think about what experiences that we can offer while people are in those vehicles. And so the business model, that's why Ford is looking to be a mobility company to lead in those experiences that you have while you're moving. And what do people do? What differentiates us from plants and non-living and inanimate objects is that we move. And so we're capitalizing on the fact that people move, and how do we give different types of experiences in that process. So I could be sitting in a vehicle, the vehicle could be detecting certain attributes about me, give me a health report at the end of the day. So those are different types of services that we can offer to monetize and offset the added cost of a more reliable vehicle without those part sales. With that, we look at different companies that are out there and what they're doing, what they're innovating on, and we assess whether or not that's something that we could easier do in the house. So for example, you might have heard of the recent announcement where Ford purchased a scooter company. Can Ford not build a scooter? I mean, if we build an F-150, we could probably build a scooter. We have Ford Credit, so we could probably handle financial transactions. And then we have Ford Pass. We could handle the infrastructure behind all that. But economically, it made more sense for us to purchase a company. So we look at, we do a lot of scouting, and we look at different companies that are out there and whether it's best to acquire them, partner with them, or just invest in them to help them along.
Next question? Go ahead.
Hello. Yeah, I was just thinking, like, with the long life cycle that we have, 60 years or 40 we are talking about, what about the obsolescence of the products and the technologies that are, because the technology disruption is very fastly happening, like, so how to deal with that, or is it in the drawing board, like how to deal with it, scalability or obsolescence?
I'm not sure I understand your question, so. could you repeat it?
Obsolescence means the technology, if it is obsolete, yeah.
Yeah, so I know in the lighting world, and please Acuity and Signify help me out here because I don't keep up as much as I probably should, but I think most of the major outdoor lighting manufacturers quote warranties of 10 years, and the projected life of the LEDs is what, 10 or more? Is that kind of a good number? Okay, so you know, you can probably plan on 10 years. Our controls, we do the same thing. But I think the important thing is that these systems, for the most part, are software-based. And so we try to keep track of what, you know, is happening in the software world and provide, you know, added functionality and enhancements to the software as we go along. But you're right, some of these technologies will be obsoleted fairly quickly. We're working with a number of air quality companies that have what I'll call community-based monitoring systems that are not agency or, you know, EPA quality instrumentation for measuring you know, pollutants. Useful life of those is expected to be, you know, 3, 4, 5 years. With the sensor life in some of them, you know, 1 to 2 years, so you have to have some maintenance. But they're priced accordingly. So, you know, they're not going to have a 20-year useful life. So you'll see some areas where it kind of holds to a longer term, and then others where it will be much more rapid. But you're right, obsolescence is something we all need to be concerned about and think price your offer and services. The other thing is, if you do lighting as a service and, you know, you're making money, you can swap that out. Or air quality as a service, say, okay, the sensor is dead after 2 years, I'm just going to put a new one in, and you keep making a monthly payment. So you can always have the latest and greatest. Goes back to the business model.
Yeah, I think when the beautiful thing is that the cities will realize more income and less expenses, and so if things, in some cases, the contracts would include natural upgrades. In fact, a lot of the big contracts that are in play now that have 10 years, 20-year contracts with municipalities, they actually include innovation clauses so that you know, the cities have the ability to have those big companies actually do the testing before they actually recommend it to the city, but they have to stay, but it leaves the responsibility up to that private sector company to actually find something that's good for their client. And in the case of Cloud Park, it's machine learning, so it just gets smarter the longer it's in play. But it is a software company, so the hardware, depending on the cameras, they may need to be upgraded. But Cloud Park would still be doing the software upgrades as well.
All right, do we have any more questions?
Did you have a comment?
I have a question.
Go ahead, Will.
So when I think about smart cities, I think about them doing two types of things. And so the first thing is to increase the effectivity of some process. And then the second is to increase the user's experience, so the public's experience. So is that an appropriate way of thinking of it? And then my assumption is the former is what's really driving adoption. And then another question is, how do you sell the latter? So that user experience as a sales point.
That's a great question. I'll rephrase it as that classical discussion of efficiency versus effectiveness, of making your existing systems more efficient, but are you also more effective in the larger goals of your public agency? Selling that whole concept of smart city applications and platforms. I think we probably all agree that energy is the most readily monetizable, energy savings. Your meter just doesn't run, it runs slower. The next in my mind is that whole labor and maintenance issue. You're still typically paying those people, but now they don't have to work on a street light or fix a parking meter. They can go off and do something else that's critical. Beyond that, for me personally, it becomes quite softer. How do you monetize human safety or quality of life or air quality? Those are much softer and might be different in different communities. Some might value noise pollution reduction or gunshot detection, some places. Chris.
Great question. And I think, you have to go back to the issue of outcomes. I was very fortunate and blessed to be invited to speak at a conference in Amman, Jordan last September. And that was really eye-opening for me, although I'm quite well-traveled internationally. I'd never been to that part of the Middle East. And this conference was a couple days and had a smart cities track. And the most interesting takeaway for me from that conference was the fact that you can look at Dubai, and there were a number of speakers on a panel I was on from Dubai, and they had the advantage of, first of all, having a monarchy with money, oil money, but they put together a really good plan, and it's culminated in a smartphone app called Dubai Now. And so a citizen from his or her smartphone can invoke up to 50 different services from 22 different agencies. So, pay your parking ticket, renew your license. I can't even remember what they all were. But the whole point is that they really focused on citizen outcomes. And when I was sitting there learning about it, I'm thinking think about all the back end work that had to go into that to integrate all those legacy IT systems, to have them all work in one environment. But it's all cloud-based. And I can't remember if it was, Amazon Web Services or Microsoft Azure that they use for the platform. But, that's something that's really useful and is a culmination of what we're all talking about here. But it also started, they're doing parking, they're doing street lights, they're doing all the, the bread and butter stuff. But,
Yeah, I think that you're correct in your assessment of smart city. It is for the overall, at the end of the day, it's for the overall well-being of the community at large. And with all these things, it's just not making money to make money. The idea is, the money that you would make from parking, let's say you plug it into the New York system and you just double that 1 million to 2 $1 billion to $2 billion, you end up with, this cash cow now coming. And it's not that some of it can go back into innovation, and the rest can go into very important programs like, healthcare in your local neighborhood. It brings everything up and where it should be. And I think it makes also the user experience, as you mentioned, everybody wants the easy button. So there's 3 buckets, right? What you want, what you don't want, and what you have to work with. And those 3 buckets, you've got the easy button you want, what you don't want is a disaster, and what you have to work with are a lot of challenges. But once we get over that hump, it's just going to be a good day. So.
Goes back to the plan. You got to have a plan. If you
Yeah.
don't have a plan, you're stuffed.
All right, with that, we're nearing the end of our time. Are there any last questions, or
Do
you have any
comments, David?
do you folks want to make any final comments before we wrap it up?
I was just going to say with the balance between efficiency and services to the users, one of my favorite quotes is, "A great deal of what you see depends on what you're looking for." And so when a particular city that I know of wanted to put optical sensors in an alleyway to detect whether or not people were parking there illegally to avoid paid parking, from a city efficiency, it sounded like a great idea, because here we'll be able to issue citations on these vehicles that are parked illegally. But then when you spin it a little bit and show the data indicates that the trash management companies can't get through the alleyways because the cars are parked, or the delivery to the restaurants can't drop off food to the restaurants because cars are in the way, then it becomes a community problem.
I would comment that the empowering the community is key for the user experience, for the efficiency, and for the adoption of the two new technologies, but also for a valuable point of view. And I would definitely engage the community.
So my advice would be, if you're in this space, get active. There are a lot of people. It's a really exciting area. A lot of stuff going on, multidimensional. I've been in it for 6 or 7 years officially, unofficially a little more than that. And what I find, the more I know, the more I learn, the less I know. So it's just really a fun spot to be in. And the possibilities are endless in terms of what can be done.
Well, hey, I thank all of you for attending today. I think this was a great session. I thank David and Dana and Chris. Don't forget to rate this session on the app with our polling function. Tweet about it if you can. And remember that there's a series of Smart City sessions that we'd like to welcome you back to, including one that's commencing here in the next 30 minutes. So thank you very much.